Hey, what's up guys, it's Oakley, and we have some awesome news on the front of Total War 3 Kingdoms, a new trailer, a blog post, and then of course E3 around the corner where we'll be seeing some more Total War 3 Kingdoms content. So this is going to be all very action-packed, coming after a long drought of news. So let's start first with the trailer here. It does definitely have some Age of Empires vibes, where in the old Age of Empires trailer, you saw kings playing chess, and then their moves coincided with, actual battles, etc. Something similar happening in the format of this trailer, which is a pretty nice throwback, and it just plays out really well. Of course, focusing on Cao Cao as the primary player, and then at the end, or throughout, we do get to see different adversaries, some of his allies, etc. Just pulled out from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, looking very, very iconic in the way they've been depicted, hailing back to the traditions about, the depictions of these famous warriors. In any case, you get to see a bunch of different guys. They looking like they're in various states of readiness. So, for instance, Liu Bei, apparently at the very end, just doesn't look very convincing compared to their the level of rendering that we've seen on Cao Cao. Liu Bei there looks so janky. So it's definitely work in development. I do hope they polish him up. But yeah, throughout the rest of the scenes here, we do get to see a glimpse of the battlefield. A couple things that do pop out. The first is going to be the fact that it does look very much like a return to kind of the Shogun style, where we see a lot of colorful visuals. The units in particular for the different factions are very much differentiated. They have flags atop them, and I really like all this. It's going to make the clash of armies very differentiated from what we've seen recently with, Thrones of Britannia, Attila, where you have a lot of muddled colors and, lots of Germanic tribes lost in the wash. Here, it's going to be very, very beautiful, I would have to say. There's also a couple shots in here we do get to see a bit of a siege. So, of course, confirming that sieges are going to be making a comeback, being that it's a historical title, with sieges being very important, and siege fortifications being very renowned in China. It would seem to imply that they're not going to be continuing with the Warhammer way of doing things. They're going to continue with what they've been doing in historical sense, which is where you can attack a city from 360 degrees. They're all going to be pretty unique, etc. From the specific shots that we do see, there are big open lanes right behind the first wall. There's an additional lane further back. So obviously they've learned their lesson where we need a lot of maneuvering room. And then also when it comes to the fortifications itself, you can see a big a curtain wall and then some large towers embedded in there. There's artillery being exchanged from both sides. And then also another thing you'll notice is fire propagation within the city. So it seems like a logical next step from what we've seen from Attila. Probably we'll be seeing siege escalation as well. Although I do have to say, in some of these shots, there are also some noticeable kind of gimmicky looking things. Some of the dust effects from the troops look super janky, whereas the fire looks good. So there's different levels of polish, and you'll also be able to pick out the lighting, which is actually pretty good. I think it's looking fairly awesome in this version. And then throughout, we do get to see some views of different soldiers, etc. And like I've said, the differentiation is looking awesome. Another big thing that was announced from the trailer is that the game is going to be pushed back to next year, so no longer occurring this year. Might be a bit of a disappointment for those of you who were looking for that deep history itch, but I think any delay is good because it obviously means it's coinciding with improvements to the game, so I can definitely wait. The next big news that we'll be getting here is going to be from this blog post. I do want to show you a little bit about that. There had been a previous post actually where they were discussing what the historical teams were up to, and just as an aside, they did hint at some more Rome 2 DLC coming our way, so we'll have to wait on that. But back to this particular one. So one of the main things that they do introduce is that there's going to be a classic mode versus like a more romantic mode. So the way they ease us into this is they talk about, hey, first things first, why are we doing the Three Kingdoms China? So CA definitely says, it's a new vivid place that we haven't explored before. There's so many personalities, lots of big battles. It's very dynamic. Now on the back of that, CA does give us a hint about new campaign systems, and just prior to that, they're talking about how important the different characters are, very much the cornerstone of the game. Their interactions, friendships, rivalries, and personalities drive the campaign like never before. And then they talk about, this is going to be new campaign features. So that gives us a hint about some of the new things that are going to be making their way into the game, obviously. Now, I've been starting to read the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the original translation itself. Maybe I'll start on the records of the Three Kingdoms for a more accurate view in the future, but I'm starting with the Romance first. And so I'm starting to get a hint of just what these interactions and friendships and rivalries are. And it's no exaggeration to say they are at the bedrock of this story. Very, very important. And there's lots of feasible ways you could see them rope this into gameplay. So, for instance, loyalty plays a big mechanic behind things. Different coalitions are super important. Honor, sense of duty are very important. So you can expect a loyalty mechanic on steroids to make a comeback. Lots of gift giving and sort of bribing of different people. You see the giving of weapons or the giving of horses, armor, maybe even giving of courtesans. Lots of different things to win people over to your causes, etc. So those are all going to be in the dynamics, I would assume, here. And then potentially once your coalition gets a certain number of maybe renowned warriors, maybe you'll have like a ranking on how esteemed your fighting force is, and that'll come with it maybe recruitment bonuses or army bonuses, morale bonuses, etc. And then once you get to a certain point, perhaps you might even be able to have enough, gravitational pull in the political sphere to maybe draw the emperor to you. That's going to be another mechanic, who controls the emperor. So all kinds of cool stuff that I can see coming out of this push on this. And this is going to be very interesting because it pushes the entire campaign and makes it revolve around the characters, which is something in previous historical titles were kind of an afterthought. You would see leaders come and go. Yes, you could get tied to them, but ultimately they would, through the ages just come and die, and your campaign wasn't necessarily tied to them too much. So that's cool. I'm very happy to see that come in. But it does lead to a very natural next question, which is something the community has been discussing a lot about, which is, okay, if you're going to depict these characters, how are you going to do this with the book here? So, for instance, are you going to go with the romance version of the story or the records version of the story? So people were worried that if you go the romantic route, it's going to be a lot of fantasy in terms of, mostly the characters, the amount of power that they have, how they can sweep away entire enemy armies, rebuff armies, charge headlong into the armies, and similarly not die. So that was a debate that people were having, and I think if CA chose either way, there would be people who would be disappointed. If you go straight fantasy, the historical crowd is going to feel like, CA is betraying the historical roots, whereas if you go straight down the line with what history has been thus far, well, then you lose out on the particular flavor and the cultural aspects of the romance of the Three Kingdoms, the thing that brings it alive, the thing that is resonating with everyone, which is going to be the larger-than-life figure. So CA had a tough choice to make, and it seems like they've actually made a pretty interesting and bold move here, where they're actually going to be embracing both. So what CA is announcing is that they have two options, two ways you can play the campaign. First is going to be the romantic version, and the second is going to be classic mode. Probably should have been calling that one the records mode, but maybe for new players that wouldn't be clear. So they've actually differentiated it, which is an awesome move. I really, really like that, and it's going to give people on both sides, what they want. So that was something I wasn't expecting, and very, very happy to see them do that. So now the next question is going to be, okay, you're differentiating the two. What can you tell us about, which variables are you going to tweak? Well, they say here, the big difference is going to be these iconic heroes and how they behave on the battlefield. So if you go with the romantic version, what they're saying here is that these characters can hold their own against hundreds of rank-and-file warriors. They'll appear as single character units and fight like the heroes of Liu Guozhang's or Guanzhong's epic. And then in classic mode, they'll still be powerful, but they're going to be tied to a bodyguard unit. So that is the main difference that they're going to be stating. That's going to be awesome. They don't really say too much. The other thing here that they state is going to be that the later events that drive the story are going to be different. So thus far we have two different things that differentiate them. One is the heroes on the battlefield. The romantic version, obviously the heroes are super powerful and can stand by themselves. And then when it comes to the narrative, there's also another differentiation that they mentioned down here, where there's going to be these narrative events, kind of similar to what we've seen in Thrones of Britannia, but I would assume that, the classical version, the classic mode is going to play out a bit more like Thrones of Britannia, where it's tapered down, and it's perhaps the events that drive the story are more like there's been a rebellion, or some sort of insurrection, or there's a plague, or there's a famine, or there's something going on, but it's all kind of historical tide that's pushing you along. Whereas the ones that are more, the narrative along the romance, it's going to be more about in the story itself, how did alliance shift and change? Did someone betray someone? Did a new coalition form? Is there a specific battle? So it looks like this one is going to be a lot more rich. They say the one for the romance is going to be much more about the choices you make and therefore how your individual story unfolds. And they're pulling directly from the rich narrative of the book itself. Now, this does draw a lot of questions for me. So, for instance, from the book, a lot of the narrative has to do with specific characters being in specific locations, interacting in specific ways, and doing all this stuff, battles taking place in certain key events. It's all kind of pre-designated in that sense, and I really wonder if, how are you going to put that into a sandbox game? So if two characters are supposed to interact in a certain way according to this narrative, what if those characters have been killed off? What if they're in different places in the world and they're not close to each other? Is there going to be something like in the storylines that you have to progress in Warhammer, where you have your kind of quest line for your different legendary lord? Is that going to be how it's done? Are there going to be, legendary battles where you can, or like quest battles that tie into the narrative? It's going to be very interesting to see how they rope this in. It seems kind of, straightforward in the way they describe it, but the execution is going to be interesting. Some more questions that I have is, what other ways are going to be differentiating these two? So, for instance, for the lords, they do state that on the battlefield, yes, one will be more powerful than the other. But other things that I would probably guess is, the lords probably in the romance version are going to be harder to kill in the campaign as well. So, for instance, they may make them immortal. Or perhaps they'll have it like a 3 strikes version where you can get wounded multiple times and then finally you're dead. But I think they're going to do something on the campaign where they're harder to get rid of. They're more, sticky, just because that also, you're going to grow so attached to these guys that you don't necessarily want them to die in a single battle. Even though they're super powerful, you don't want them going down without a fight in the campaign either. And then also that'll kind of help out later when they try and do these specific narrative events if your lord is still alive. So that's another outstanding question. Another thing that I think is going to be logical for them to do in the romance versus the classical mode is going to be the way you level up your character. So for instance, what I'm imagining is for both they'll probably share some of the lower level skill trees. But then once you get to the higher levels, I'm assuming the classical version is going to have some sort of cap, whereas the romantic version is going to have, the skill tree extend even further, where they start to get into some crazy high stats and buffs and some maybe supernatural aspects. There'll also be, same thing goes with the mounts, which will be important. I assume the mounts are going to be, you're on foot, then perhaps you're given a standard war horse, then you start to get, an officer's war horse, and eventually you get some of these legendary war horses that are in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And in the romantic version, these will probably be given additional stats where they're like super fast, or maybe they have even more battlefield buffs. Maybe they have auras around them that inspire forces. So there's all kinds of little tweaking they can do with the mechanics that we already have established. So yeah, I'm very excited for this. Thus far, CA hasn't said too much else about what's going to be coming down the pipeline, but they did say to stay tuned for what's at E3. So thus far, I'm really, really happy by the delay. It means they can do a lot more polish, which is obviously something that's very, very welcome for Total War games, especially something with the scope and scale of a Three Kingdoms title. And yeah, I'm also very excited about the differentiation between classic and romantic. That's going to be awesome, and it definitely finally opens the door for CA introducing stuff like this in all future historical titles. Not in the sense that we would get to a medieval game, where you have something that's like, fantasy medieval and classic medieval, but it's introducing something where you can customize the way your campaign works on the outset. So this is finally getting us to a place where players have always wanted, which is kind of like what the mods offer, which is essentially when I start my campaign, I really want the ability to tweak a lot of factors, not just the difficulty level in the battles and in the campaign, but maybe sliders on the strength of your leaders, sliders on traits and stats, all kinds of sliders to really customize your experience. So this kind of opens the door to that possibility in the future, and I really, really like the direction. So yeah, that's it for this video. Stay tuned for more. On the main channel, what I'm going to start doing is covering kind of like a historical introduction to these different characters, pulling out from what we know about them historically, and then also from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, just doing an introduction to them, and I'll be doing little small character bios on these on the main channel, so stay tuned for that. And then obviously with E3, as I said, around the corner, and CA presenting some stuff for Three Kingdoms, expect to see more on that front as well. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Stay tuned for more, and definitely let me know what you think about Three Kingdoms. I could not be more excited. So yeah, peace out.